Now let's take a look at the supply curve and the demand curve together and how they impact the price and quantity in a given market. If you remember, our demand curve is downward sloping and our supply curve is upward sloping. Equilibrium price and quantity is very easy to determine from a supply and demand curve. It's simply the intersection of the supply and the demand. On the price axis, this price P is directly across from the intersection of supply and demand, and this quantity Q is directly below the intersection of the supply and demand curve. This point in the center is the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. And let's replace those P's and Q's for price and quantity, and let's go back to our market for gum. And let's say that at this particular point, the equilibrium price is $6 and the equilibrium quantity is 80 packs. And that's for the quantity of gum. The reason this is said to be at equilibrium is at $6, the quantity demanded, if you look at the demand curve, is 80, and at $6, the quantity supplied, if you look on the supply curve, is also $80. So there's equilibrium. All the gum that is produced, which is 80, the quantity of gum is 80, the suppliers are willing to supply 80, is purchased because consumers are willing to pay $6 for that 80 cases or 80 pieces of gum. Sometimes in a market, a state of disequilibrium can occur temporarily. Let's say that price of gum increases to 8 from 6. If you look at that and follow those 2 points along the graphs, you'll see that at $8, the quantity demanded, shown on the demand curve, is going to fall. And it's going to fall to a point, let's say, to 20 packages of gum. Suppliers, on the other hand, if price increases, as we saw in the supply curve, suppliers are willing to produce and supply more. Let's say 100. When this occurs, this area in here, the difference between the quantity supplied, which is 100, and the quantity demanded, which is 20, is a surplus. This surplus of 80 units, and the 80 units comes from the 100 minus the 20 equals a surplus of 80, is only temporary. What happens next is competitive forces will push the price downward, until the price gets back to the equilibrium price of $6 and equilibrium is restored. Again, $6 price, the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied, in this case 80, and equilibrium is back in play, and there's no longer a surplus of gum. Another example of market disequilibrium is if the price is less than the market price. Let's take a look if the price of gum falls to $4. What happens at that point? Well, if we follow the graphs and we read, we'll see that at a price of $4, suppliers are willing to supply less than the equilibrium price of 80, and let's call it 20, but demand at $4 has increased, and let's call it 100. At this point, you have a shortage. And this shortage is a result of prices being below equilibrium, which means the quantity demanded is higher than the quantity supplied. This will only last a short time. Market forces will be back in work again. We'll push prices up, increasing them back to the equilibrium price of $6, where supply equals demand, And once again, we'll have an equilibrium price of 6 and an equilibrium quantity of 80.